Testing, 1, 2, 3. Perfect. I'm so happy to be here. This is actually my first time in Regina. And, I've been to several places to speak about ostomies. It's probably the only thing you'll get me to speak about in public. But I love exploring Canada. I was in BC not too long ago, and now I'm here, and I'm so happy to be here. And thank you for the invite. Tonight I'm going to be talking about becoming your own advocate. I think it's super important that everybody becomes their own advocate. For me especially, I came from a background of Crohn's disease, which took its toll on me. But once I learned to become my own advocate, things changed dramatically. So I'm hoping to share some of that with you guys. Now, just to get a few things out of the way, I am a patient, just like most of you in this room. I'm not a medical professional. Likewise, my experience should not substitute the advice that your nurse or your doctor gives you. Any brands that I might be mentioning tonight, I'm giving as examples. I'm not sponsored by any brands. I'm not, I don't get paid to talk about particular brands. So I just want to make that clear. So we're going to be going through my personal story with chronic illness. I think it's important to know where I came from, just to understand where I'm at now and hopefully where I like to be. I'm going to talk about the life after my surgery. I think it's important to know that, having an ostomy isn't all doom and gloom. I had some preconceived notions before going into the surgery, and I'm sure a lot of you have. But I want to show you that life is not quite what it seems at the beginning. I also want to share with you how I began advocating for others. As you heard, I have my own website, and that was born from the desire to help other patients, and I'll explain how that came to be. And I want to talk about becoming your own advocate. Again, that's a crucial part of this. Now, we will be going over some questions and answers. If you'd like to save those questions that you might have to the end, hopefully if we haven't already talked about it, then you can bring that up and we'll discuss that. So you'll notice in the corner I've got timestamps for the year that the photos were taken. I want you to notice just how dramatic my appearance is from one photo to the next. But I want to talk about my life before illness. Now, I was a regular, father in his mid-20s when I was diagnosed. I had a full-time office job. I enjoyed playing sports. I was quite active. I was able to, like most kids in their 20s, I guess, eat and drink whatever I wanted. So, beer, bag of chips, Coke, that was totally normal for me, almost every day. And that soon changed once I discovered what was about to come. Now, physically, I was strong. As I mentioned, I was active. I was playing sports. Mentally, I had no problems. I was quite happy with my life at the time. Little did I know that was going to change. So some of the early signs that I had, you'll notice here 3 years later, I began to lose a lot of weight. And my weight fluctuated from the time I was diagnosed to ultimately where I am now, from 108 pounds to 170. A lot of that was due to illness. I was feeling fatigued all the time. Now, when I was playing soccer, I was like the last person to quit on the field. And when I started to notice symptoms, fatigue was one of the symptoms that really got me, because I was, unable to play sports. That really got me down. But just overall, I was always tired, always felt like I was never getting enough rest. I also noticed something that didn't actually dawn on me as a symptom of my inflammatory bowel disease until much later, but every time I would play soccer, it seemed like the whole week after, I would be in extreme pain in my ankles and my legs, and this would present itself over the course of my illness through joint pains and other extraintestinal manifestations, they call it. So I received my official diagnosis October of 2008. It was actually a few weeks after my 28th birthday. And I wasn't feeling that bad at the time of my diagnosis, at least not as bad as it would become. But I spent, a lot of my time on the sofa, just kind of too tired to really do much. You'll notice the time in that first picture is November 2008. The one on the right is February 2009. So it was literally a few months after, and you could already tell how skinny I had become. I had a lot of comments during this time from people, and I would hear after the fact that they would, kind of say, hey, is everything okay with this guy? I had no idea I was that sick until I started looking back at these pictures. Now, from the time of my diagnosis to around the time that I finally ended up having my surgery, I went through a lot of ups and downs. Part of the problem with inflammatory bowel disease is if it's not in complete remission, you kind of have these good months, bad months. And that's kind of normal for most patients who don't have their illness under control. I spent a lot of time, energy, money, looking at alternative therapies. Like most people, I was very naive when I first received the diagnosis. So I would hop on Google, start searching up how to cure inflammatory bowel disease. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there that say, yeah, this could be easily treated, easily cured with just a few supplements here and there, maybe change a diet. So I went through a lot of those alternative therapies. I went through a lot of the stuff that was supposed to fix me. I also went through a lot of the conventional therapies that were available. Unfortunately, with my particular illness, nothing was really managing it 100%. And this was actually a theme throughout my whole illness. I would try something, it would seem to work, and then I would just start feeling really bad. So we explored many options. Any kind of symptom relief that I had was very temporary. Like I said, a lot of it could have maybe even been placebo. Hey, I'm trying something new, I must be feeling better. It really wasn't that good. Once you had me scoped in for colonoscopy, you would realize how bad things were getting. And during this time, I spent most of my time either on the sofa, bedbound, rarely left the house. Playing soccer was totally out of the question by then. Now in 2008, I call this the Great Flare of 2010. You'll notice there, the first picture, February 2010, I was actually feeling pretty good in that picture. Little did I know things were going to change. A few months after that photo was taken, I started to have what's commonly known as a flare. So with inflammatory bowel disease, a flare can happen sometimes suddenly, but it's essentially all the symptoms go haywire. So, I was having very frequent bowel movements. We're talking like 20 times a day. Most of the time, those bowel movements were bloody. I wasn't able to eat like anything. Water would hurt, plain rice, if I could get it down, wouldn't stay down for long. It was a really, really tough time. I actually don't remember most of the summer of 2010. If you were to ask me what movies came out, what the hit songs were, I had no idea. Now that I look back, it's kind of funny because now these songs and movies come back and I'm like, oh wow, that's something new. Well, no, it just came out in 2010. So... But I kind of set up, an office and a workstation there. I had a couple of computers going on. There was an iPad. I'm using one. There's one on the table. You'll notice there, almost funny, I have some bottles of supplements there. Still trying to self-medicate. But you'll notice we go from 2010 to 2012. There's no other photos of me during that time. I think there were actually 15 pictures between that time, between those two dates, of me, and most of them were me on the sofa. So from the end of 2012 into 2013, this is when, literally my whole life changed. The end of 2012, I actually started a clinical trial. So that involved going on steroids and then a biologic drug. Unfortunately, like most other things that I tried, the relief was very temporary. And when I ended up having a final colonoscopy, it ended up that my colon was looking worse than it ever has. And it was at that time when it was suggested, hey, why not explore maybe having surgery to have an ostomy put in place? Now, I'll be honest. When I was told, hey, maybe an ostomy is for you, I kind of freaked out. And at that time, the suggestion was only for a temporary ostomy. And I totally lost it. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know, like, I'm already bedridden most of the time. Is this going to mean, like, I just have no chance of ever going out? I didn't know what that meant for, what I was able to eat, what I was going to wear, whether I would be able to spend time with my kids. There were a lot of questions that I didn't know the answers to, and a lot of it was just not knowing anything about ostomies. So I actually had a consultation with my surgeon, and I was bringing up a lot of these questions like, well, will I be able to, like, walk around the block after the surgery? And she kind of chuckled, and I didn't know why she was chuckling. But she said, yeah, that won't be a problem. And so, as I started asking more questions, I sort of thought, okay, well, maybe this isn't going to be too bad, Ultimately, I had my surgery. It was in August. And about a month before that, I started looking at other patients, other people that have an ostomy, and I wanted to see what their life was like. Like, are they just stuck at home after the surgery? What are they doing? And I found people that were climbing mountains, going on trips, spending time with their loved ones. And I thought, okay, well, this is interesting. Now, it was around that time that I had created my own website. Now, my website, I initially started because I am vegan, and for those who don't know what vegan is, I don't eat animal products, I don't wear animal products, and this is something that I've done since 2000. So this was something that's become a part of me, it's my lifestyle, and I didn't know how that would change with an ostomy. I kept hearing, well, you're not going to be able to eat salads or high-fiber food, and I thought, well, that's pretty much all I eat, so what am I going to do? So I initially started my website to try to document what my experience was like living, plant-based lifestyle with an ostomy. Since then, I've actually been doing a lot of product reviews, ostomy accessory reviews. I know a lot of the times, when I was looking for stuff, I didn't really know how it would work out. So I turned to other people who were kind of exploring these options, and I thought, wow, that's kind of cool. I'm going to be an ostomate, I'm going to be trying these products. Why not share my experience? So that's a big part of my website too. But it, evolved into, sharing my experience more, getting more into the educational piece of it, because there were a lot of questions that started coming up that I was able to answer just through my own experience. So since then, the site's grown quite considerably. I believe it's one of the largest patient-run ostomy websites in the world. I get over 30,000 people visiting the website a month. And that's only what I can track, right? There's a lot more on there. If you're using an ad blocker, I probably don't know that you visited the site. But the articles have been read in excess of 1 million times. I also have a YouTube channel, so I have videos, educational videos. I'm close to 200 videos now. And I also run a support group on the website, and we have over 600 members now in over 500 topics. So when I talk about life with an ostomy, I like to talk about the things that I've actually done and not just things that you could do or might be able to do. And I'll be honest, my life after surgery became so much better than before surgery. Even before all of the illness came into play, I wasn't doing half of the stuff that I started doing until after I got my ostomy, which I think is kind of cool. Traveling, for example, the fact that I'm here would never have happened if I didn't get my ostomy. I wasn't a traveler, okay? You'll notice there, the bottom left corner is a selfie from a mountain. That's actually Table Mountain in South Africa. It's one of the first places that I was invited to speak at, and it was actually my first flight as an adult, and it was with an ostomy. So that was like a 19-hour flight, and I was able to do that, no problem. The bottom picture there, it's kind of dark. It's in front of a Cineplex Odeon. I've been able to go out with my kids, watch movies, get groceries. These are things that I take for granted now, but before, when I was too sick to even get out of bed, I didn't really think that I had the opportunity to do this. I love hiking. It's one of the things that I really enjoy. I was at Disney in Orlando, like last year and the year before that. I've been to baseball games. There's a picture of me next to these images of bears. That was actually in Vancouver. Again, Universal Studios. Now, the bottom left picture there, I am in that picture. I probably look about as big as an insect. That's a reverse bungee. So what they do in a traditional bungee jump, you're jumping off of something from really high heights. In a reverse bungee, you actually start off in the bottom right corner there. You actually start off in that position, and it's like a slingshot, and it basically catapults you into the air. So the picture on the bottom left is me something like 300 feet up in the air with an ostomy. As it was mentioned earlier, I love roller coasters. I would have never gone on a roller coaster, honestly, before my surgery. When my daughter said, she wants to go to Canada's Wonderland, and I thought, what are you, crazy? Who does that? I started going on roller coasters after my surgery, and I've loved them ever since. There's a picture of me. I'm holding up both hands like that. That's actually to signify that was my 10th ride that day on that roller coaster.
On that roller coaster.
On that roller coaster. Now, that one there is actually the Leviathan. That's the tallest, fastest, longest roller coaster in Canada. My claim to fame, honestly, I've been on that ride in one single day 21 times. With an ostomy. No problems. So sometimes people ask me, like, what motivated you to keep going? Like, the prospect of having a life-changing surgery, doesn't that get you down? Doesn't that kind of demotivate you? And I would have to say, I guess it depends on how you look at it. My perspective at the beginning, when I was told that I would have a temporary ostomy, was very negative. I didn't know much. I was very pessimistic. And I was actually looking forward to it by the time I was told I would need a permanent ostomy, because I was just feeling so bad at that point. But what really motivated me to keep going, to be more positive, I started looking at other people who had an ostomy. That's really one of the key things, I think, in my success as an ostomate was I saw what other people were doing, and I realized, okay, yeah, I can do those things. It's not going to stop me. I also started asking questions. And we're going to get to this in a bit, but I think questions was, I didn't know a lot. I had to ask questions. Then I learned more about it. Then I became more comfortable with it. And I think that's kind of something that I think everyone should be doing. I started setting goals for myself. Rather than telling myself, okay, I won't be able to do that, I won't be able to do that, I won't be able to do that, I started saying, okay, what will I be doing now? I started making these plans, and I started making them come to life. I started learning from my mistakes. Now, this is something that is kind of an acquired skill. Sometimes we might have a problem with our ostomy appliance. The natural thing is to just be discouraged by it. I try to learn from it. I try to learn from those experiences. If I have a leak in public, I try to go back and figure out, okay, why did I have that? How can I better plan for that in the future? And then I kind of learn from that so that, hey, if it happens again, I'll be prepared for it. But hopefully it won't happen again because I've learned from those mistakes. I also like to try new things. I've told my daughter already, I've made her a promise. She's 16, but I told her, one of these years, we're going to jump out of an airplane and go parachuting. So that's something that I'd like to try. Again, this is something that I've only started considering after my surgery. I think that we start building upon our successes, and that's something that I try to do as often as I can. And I also think an important piece to what motivated me to keep going on is, seeking help and voicing my concerns. So, for example, a lot of us, we tend to bottle up problems. I know that with my inflammatory bowel disease, part of the issue was I didn't want to seek the help that I actually needed. I was trying to do everything myself, knowing that something was wrong, but just thinking, this will pass, this will eventually get better, and it didn't. So I think that was something that I think with my ostomy, I totally changed that around. If I knew something was off, I started asking for help. I started seeking for that help. So this is something I think that I've learned through my website, is that it is actually easier to advocate for others. But really the most important thing is that we advocate for ourselves. I'm a firm believer that, we're in charge of our health. It's our responsibility ultimately to look after our own health. Okay, we have to take accountability for that and responsibility. And that's a message that I like to give to others. Now, what are some ways we can become our own advocates? Well, the first thing that I would encourage is get involved with your own care. If you're physically able to, if you're mentally able to, I want you to play an active role in your ostomy care. Change your appliance. If you can, if you're physically able to, do it. It's actually quite funny. When I was in the hospital recovering from surgery, and I was really loopy because of the anesthesia, and that was something that actually happened a couple of times, and we corrected it on one of my later surgeries. But when the nurse came in and said, okay, we're going to change your ostomy appliance, let's do it, they're like, no, I want to do it. I want to do it. And they thought, wow, okay, that's cool. But I had to kind of take charge of that, and I think that was an important step for me. Even when I started having home care to tend to some of the wounds that I had after surgery, I said, no, I don't need any help with this. Thank you very much. And, if I needed help, I would ask for it. But I think it was important for me to say, this is mine now. I'm going to take ownership of it. And I started playing an active role in that care. Now, the reasons why you'd want to do that, obviously, it builds confidence. Once you start doing things for yourself, you're going to be more confident about continuing to do that for yourself. It also increases your understanding, of your own personal needs, which in turn will help you to voice them onto your healthcare professional. But it can also improve your independence. And I think for a lot of us, who's faced with a major surgery like that, the loss of independence probably hurts more than, the surgery itself. And for us to maintain our independence, I think it's a great thing. It's a gift. So another thing about becoming your own advocate is don't limit yourself. And I think this is super important. A lot of people see their ostomy as a hindrance. And I kind of view an ostomy like a pair of glasses. It's a tool. We need it. It's not going to limit you. Okay? If I were to take my glasses off, that's going to be a big problem. If I were to not have an ostomy, I probably wouldn't be here today speaking with you. So for me, an ostomy is a tool. If you have that mindset that it's not here to hurt you, it's here to help you, I think you're going to be far better off. Now, again, I want you to set your goals. I want you to set goals and then plan to make them happen. That's something that I think will help you to move on from your surgery, even if you've had an ostomy for several years, but you have been reluctant to kind of make plans. Make those plans, and see them through. I think it's going to really boost your confidence and encourage you to do more. Learn to problem solve. Problem solving for me has become almost like a game. If I run into an issue with my appliance, if I were to have a leak, for example, I try to go through a checklist. What could it be? Is it this? Is it this? Is it this? And I think that really helps me to better understand my appliance, my ostomy, how to take care of it. And I think it's a great way to, again, not to limit yourself, not to just say, well, I have a problem. Okay. Actively try to either solve it yourself or get your healthcare professional to help you. Be a team in that. And again, I mentioned earlier, learn from your mistakes. I've had a couple of mishaps with my appliance. I learn from the mistakes. Sometimes these things are unavoidable, but if you can plan them, if they seem to be happening over and over again, find out what's causing that and then move forward. So I want you guys to ask questions. Not right now, but I want you guys to ask questions. I think that will help you to gain more understanding about your situation. It'll help you to make informed decisions. And I think that's really important. For me, when I was told I needed an ostomy, had I not investigated what that actually meant, I wouldn't have been making an informed decision. Even though that might have been the best decision, it would not have been informed. And I know that our doctors are usually the ones to give us, the most ideal outcomes, the best course of action. But you should still learn more about it. Become informed about it. That'll help you to even develop more questions so that you can ask your healthcare professionals, hey, I was reading about this. Is this a risk that I should be looking into? Is this something that's going to affect me? And kind of move forward with that. So I've put together some, I guess, groups of questions that you either should be asking your healthcare professional. Perhaps these are questions that you've already asked. But I think we should all familiarize ourselves with some of these questions. And I'm going to have the help of these two here to maybe have some input on what questions patients should be asking. So for myself, I would ask questions like, how will this appliance, how will this surgery affect my day-to-day living? So will it change my diet? Will it change my ability to work or the type of work that I'm doing? Am I going to be able to play sports or do hobbies? Things like that. I don't know if you guys get asked these questions often, but are lifestyle-related questions something that patients should be asking?
Of course. You need to know from the very beginning what things you can and can't do. I mean, you know what your limitations might be before you have your surgery, but you need to know that there are no limitations. Everything that you were doing before, maybe you were sick, you can do again, or maybe explore and do other things. And foods that might have caused you irritation or bothersome, you can just eat those. You need to find out if you can eat them. It might be the most favorite thing, that chocolate ice cream, but you know that you're in the bathroom the whole night if you eat that chocolate ice cream. So you have to know whether you could eat that again. So you have to know everything that you need to know before going in to make sure that you're making the right decision, but get that reassurance. That's the biggest thing. So that you know that everything's going to be okay, right?
I'll talk later. Okay. Yeah, diet is actually a big question that I get just having the website that I do, but I had a lot of questions revolving diet. I know that a lot of the general sheets that we tend to get, maybe in the hospital or elsewhere, maybe online, they tend to be very cautious. So they might say things like avoid eating salad, avoid eating high fiber foods, things like that. I think a lot of the times that really depends on the specific situation you might find yourself in. So, like, we all might have an ostomy for totally different reasons. For me, with inflammatory bowel disease, food was a huge thing for me. Like, I couldn't eat anything. It was difficult to digest certain foods. Some foods cause more pain than others. But with my ostomy, I started experimenting at the beginning, and I started expanding my menus. And now I can literally eat whatever I want, but I have to eat in a certain way. So another way of putting it is, I don't limit specific foods. I'm just more mindful on how I eat them. So, for example, popcorn. Most people say, whoa, I can't do it. Well, have you tried it? Sometimes people don't try things, and then they say, well, I can't do it because I was told I can't do it. I eat popcorn all the time, but I'm very specific with how I eat it. I make sure that I chew it very, very well. Same thing goes with salads. I wouldn't encourage anybody to eat a large raw kale salad. That would probably be a mistake off the bat. But when you get used to eating salads, and you might start off with iceberg lettuce, right? You move on to romaine. You start off with smaller quantities and make sure that you're chewing them. You can probably graduate to other things. But I think it's important just to know that we do have limitations. I've had a blockage that has sent me to the hospital. I was very reckless at the time. It was completely my fault. I learned from my mistakes, and I never had that happen again. But it was an instance where I was too overconfident, didn't have enough time, really rushing through my meal. And then I spent a couple of days in the hospital with an NG tube and, down my nose. So, you have to be realistic about it, but you should be asking these questions so that hey, is this something that I can try? How can I go about trying that? If it's something like sports or hobbies, if you have a very physically demanding sport or job, that might be something you want to ask your surgeon. How do I maybe prevent hernias? Or am I even at a risk of having a hernia? Your surgery might be different, right?
Can we just go back to diet a little bit? The
Yes.
thing that is important to know, Eric talks about his experiences living with an ileostomy, but it's very important to know that for the most part, after you have surgery with a colostomy or a urinary ostomy, there are no limitations to what you need to eat. Now, if there were problems that gave you trouble with a colostomy, you might have to avoid those for a little while or give them a try before you completely eliminate them from your diet. But all foods that you might have eaten before, you can eat again. And with a urostomy, the most important thing, you can eat whatever you want. The most important thing is to make sure you're drinking adequate fluids, just like with your colostomy and your ileostomy. But no diet limitations with a colostomy. And those things are important because we spend our day eating, right? We enjoy eating, so we need to know what we can eat. Is there, yeah. Okay.
So I think this is another question that I think really everybody should be asking is, what will my recovery look like after surgery? Some of us have these assumptions like you're going to be laid up in bed for months at a time, and that may not actually be true. But I think it's important to understand perhaps, maybe how long you're going to be spending in the hospital, have realistic expectations. You might want to ask about some of your home care, and I don't know how it is here, but in Ontario I was sent home, and I did have a home care nurse probably for a few weeks. And that was something that I wouldn't have even expected, but that was something that I should have asked about and I was told about when I was in the hospital. Pain management is another thing. And I know, in the U.S., I deal with a lot of people in the U.S., and pain management is a very sensitive topic there. I know there's a lot of issues with opioids abuse and that sort of thing, but talk to your doctor about pain management and what the appropriate course of action is when you're sent home from surgery or if you're planning on having surgery. I think those are very important things to ask. Another thing might be your restrictions. You might have temporary restrictions that you may not know about right after your surgery, so that's something you should be asking your doctor or your surgeon. If there's something you're doing that's particularly physical, ask. You might have some weight restrictions at the beginning, but that might change, and you want to know when that would change. You might have to have a follow-up, and get the okay for that, but you might be able to add more to that.
In terms of the restrictions? I think, can you hear me? Yeah. So are you talking about the physical restrictions after surgery?
Yeah.
So, when patients have, major abdominal operation and you're creating an ileostomy or colostomy, even if they didn't have that stoma, we would still be advising for no lifting more than 10 pounds for 6 weeks to prevent a midline hernia, right? So the thing about hernias, which I was going to touch on later, but, people sometimes worry about peristomal hernia. So what that means is, in the area around the ileostomy or colostomy, maybe there's other loops of bowel that are trapped in there, and there's a big bulge noted. When you create an ileostomy or colostomy, by definition, you're actually creating a hernia, right? Because you're actually slicing the abdominal fascia to create that hole. So people say that, the hernia is the most common complication of having a stoma, but it's not really a complication as much as it is necessary to actually create that stoma. So what I'm trying to say is that the lifting would be a restriction just like it would be for the abdominal operation portion of the colostomy, but not so much afterwards. You would be able to lift, and maybe you will get a hernia long term, meaning that maybe it will enlarge. If it's not symptomatic, usually we don't worry about it. If it becomes symptomatic, then we do. So, so in response to your question, so restrictions, they're not permanent. They usually are for a finite period of time.
Excellent.
We tend to be very diligent at 8 weeks, knowing what people's activity level is, in teaching exercises to strengthen that muscle around the ostomy or fitting them for a hernia support belt for prevention. If you do sports or even just doing your yard work, or lots of people will say they don't lift anything, but even coughing after surgery or developing, if you have pneumonia or a chronic lungs disease, you might develop a hernia without even lifting. So we try to really do a very good job of teaching people how to eliminate that risk, because, it might still occur, but we will try to do what we can to prevent that from happening, because it is a complication that often isn't corrected after surgery unless it causes problems. Right? Yeah.
I'm curious to know, dehydration and return visits to the ER after surgery. Is that something that you run into a lot, like with especially ileostomy patients?
Yeah, so I think so we're talking about ileostomies, we're saying the small bowel has been brought to the skin in comparison with colostomies where the colon has been brought to the skin. So you can understand that the purpose of the colon is to absorb 2 to 3 liters of water that, if you have an ileostomy, you're not going to have that absorption. So the effluent or the output from that ileostomy is going to be more liquid. It depends on the location of that ileostomy. So if it's closer to the stomach, you're going to have a lot more output than if it's further down or distal. That being said, because the purpose of our large intestine, the colon, is to absorb all that water, patients with ileostomies are very prone to dehydration. So we do see a lot of visits to the ER. But again, that's kind of going back to your point of being an advocate for your health and knowing what things work for you, right? So Sheryl and the other nurses will give guidelines about how much water to drink, what foods to avoid, but every patient's different in terms of their own physiology and how much output they will have. Yes, we do see visits to the ER. Usually it's patients who have higher ileostomies than more distal ones. But these things can be managed too.
I just sort of want to do a little bit of demonstration. He's talking about where the intestine is. So let's pretend this is your body on the outside. Now, when I open this up, the parts are not really all together very well. Anyways, this is your body on the outside. So you can see there are a couple holes, there's some holes here. And those are going to be your ostomy. So they can be in many locations. Oops, sorry for the noise. Okay, so this is what you look like on the inside. Oops, sorry. Sure, I probably can talk loud enough. So when he was talking about being closer to your stomach, when you eat food, the saliva breaks down the food, making it small enough to travel down the esophagus and in the stomach. In the stomach, the food is mixed and churned and broken down. And when it's ready for more digestion, it moves along to the small intestine. So closer to the small intestine, you're going to have more watery output, not much digestion of that stool or of the food that you eat. So in the small intestine, the food is mixed with those gastric juices, and it's blended and broken down. And when it's ready for more, it goes to many parts in the intestine and does different jobs for nutrition. When the waste is separated from that, it will move along to the large intestine, which is about 6 feet long. And the job there, like Dr. Suri said, is to absorb that 2 to 3 liters of water into the rest of the part of the body, and the salt as well, and move it along to hold near the rectum. Now this part is all mixed up. It should be. The rectum is at the bottom here. And so near the rectum where you're going to wait to pass a bowel movement. So wherever your ileostomy might be, lower portion of the small intestine, you are going to pull that portion of intestine out to the surface of the skin. And if it is close to the end, then you should have pretty good function of a soft, a paste, or a pasty type of stool. Okay, so we're doing some surgery here, Dr. Suri. Sorry. So you're going to pull that small intestine out, and you're going to kind of cuff it like a turtleneck, and fold it back to create something called a stoma. Okay, so that's how your stoma is sort of going to work. Okay, of course, the rest of the body is closed up with your incision, and that's going to all heal up, right? Now, in some cases, like Eric sort of explained, his whole large intestine was removed, okay? And the bottom end, let's pretend it's not here, it was all sewn up, right? So, we try to give a visual of patients so they have an idea of sort of what's expected and how the rest of the intestine is going to function. Of course, the closer to the rectum or the closer to the anus that you are, the more solid or more formed your stool is going to be. So with a colostomy, of course, you're not going to have both. You're going to have more softer formed stool because you're using most of that large intestine to absorb that 2 to 3 liters of water. Okay?
And if you have an ileostomy, the rest of the small bowel will adapt to helping absorb some of that water too. So, when you have a surgery initially, and let's say you're having a very high output ileostomy and there's a lot of fluid in the first post-op days, and like Eric is saying, maybe patients are coming back to the emergency department with dehydration, that will change over time because the surface area of the small bowel will adapt to absorbing more water so that the effluent or the output from that ileostomy is thicker, and soon will actually start to resemble more stool, or like a solid bowel movement that you have out of the rectum.
That's great. So other questions you should ask, and like, don't be afraid to ask for help, but certain difficulties that you might have, for example, with your particular supply that you might be using. Maybe you're not getting long enough wear time, or maybe there's something going on where you're having leaks all the time. These are questions you should be asking your stoma nurse. They would be the most qualified to answer these. Skin health. Some of us assume our skin is going to look a certain way, and sometimes it may not actually be the healthiest skin. So you want to have someone assess your skin, make sure that the area around your stoma looks good. I think this is really important. When I first had my surgery, I was aiming more for long wear time, and I hadn't known, or I hadn't realized that, hey, your stoma is going to start shrinking like really fast, buddy. So I had a lot of erosion around my skin, just around the stoma, and that caused a lot of issues for me. But I learned better, and I did see my stoma nurse, and she kind of educated me about that. But these are things that you should be asking. Don't let the problem get like really bad. Ask for help early on, and skin health is always going to be a question I think that most ostomates will have. And we touched upon some of the hernia management. There may be products you can get to help prevent hernias. There may be exercises you can do to help strengthen the abdominal muscles to help prevent hernias. So these are things that you should be asking your nurse if they're specific to the ostomy appliance and that sort of thing. I don't know if you have any other questions that you think patients should be asking, or that maybe you get a lot of.
I can start.
Okay, good.
The questions that I get are going to be very different than often the questions that Sheryl will look at. Truth be told, Sheryl and the nurses in the Regina Ostomy chapter do such a good job that most of the questions are already answered by the time patients come and see me. So that helps a lot. Usually when patients see me, it's an upfront discussion because they've been diagnosed with a rectal cancer or colon cancer. And the first question they'll always ask, if they're going to have an ileostomy or colostomy, is it permanent, right? So that's the first question they'll ask. And then, once I've done that surgery for them, at subsequent visits, their question will be, when can this be reversed? So in terms of the permanence, I think it's important for patients to ask that question, but like Eric was saying, I think it's important to ask why, and what is the reason for having an ileostomy or a colostomy. I always say that, health-related concerns are probably the greatest unifier among all people. So everybody has a desire to be disease-free and have good health, but patients that are coming to my office for their health-related concerns, they come from all different backgrounds and have completely different value systems. So it's often hard for me to know in a quick visit how much their underlying knowledge of their diseases and the necessity for having that stoma. So it's important to ask questions so that I can understand what I need to explain to them, right? So I think the most common indication for performing ileostomies or colostomies these days is probably for malignancy or cancer. Now that we're doing rectal cancers more frequently, often patients will get temporary ileostomies, and it's important for them to ask why they would have a temporary, why some patients would have a permanent colostomy. In terms of the second question of reversibility, I always tell patients it's good to wait. I know patients are often eager to reverse their colostomy or ileostomy, but I also think it's important for them to give themselves some time to heal from their surgery, deal with their cancer, which is usually the primary concern, and then we can fix that ileostomy or colostomy if it's not permanent at a later date. The reason I advocate for waiting longer is not only because you want to treat the systemic portion of the disease, whether it be chemotherapy, but also because the scar tissue in the abdomen melts away as time goes by. So if you rush into the operating theater at a 3-month mark from an ileostomy or colostomy and try to reverse it, your chance of having complications during the surgery is often higher because you can often injure other portions of the bowel. If you wait more like a year, 6 months, you'll find that the tissue planes are a lot less hostile and the risk of complications is less. The other thing is patients probably should ask is, what are the complications related to their stoma? I think Eric was saying that it's important for patients to make an informed decision. So just like when I consent them for an operation, I tell them there's that risk of bleeding or infection, and they make that informed decision that, okay, I'm able to undergo this operation, I would have a blood transfusion if it's necessary. I think they should understand the complications that they may have related to their ileostomy or colostomy, and it's important to go over those.
Good. Okay, so in conclusion, I think that in order to become a successful ostomy, you have to advocate for yourself. We've talked about, many of the reasons why, the questions to ask, but I think ultimately it ends up being, you need to take control of your own health to gain confidence, to gain independence. There are so many benefits to doing that.
Give me a broken chair, Patty.
I also think it's important to ask questions. Now, I put there men especially. Now, there's a reason for that. I think this is really interesting because when I look at some of the visitors that come to my website, without knowing them, if I just look at the analytics, it tells me that approximately 50% are men and 50% are women. But when I start getting questions, it's almost exclusively from women. Now, they may have a question for themselves, but most of the time it's, I'm asking on behalf of my husband. And I think, well, why can't your husband just ask? But I don't think this is uncommon. I've run into this actually quite a few times, even with patient advocates. Like in the ostomy IBD space, there are very few male advocates out there, even though the disease is actually split 50-50. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's a pride thing. Maybe it's just an embarrassment thing, cultural. I have no idea. But I think it's important, guys, if you have questions, make sure you're asking them. And you ask them. Don't get your wives to. Okay? I think it's also, again, important that you work with your doctor or nurse to help problem solve. If you're having complications and it's not being addressed adequately, you're not going to have a very good, positive time. You're not going to overcome that quickly. You're just going to kind of drag on into it. So it's important to seek help, kind of solve those issues right away, and then move forward with that. And try new things. Don't be afraid to go traveling if that's something that you enjoyed doing before. Don't be afraid to jump out of an airplane if that's something you want to do. These are things that, we have a second chance at life as far as I'm concerned. So try these things, build your confidence that way, and I think you're gonna benefit overall from it.